Hi, welcome to the Pursuit of Truth. So it's another one about division. Seems to be what all my pursuits of truth are really about, is division of humanity, the way that we, because of our system, see ourselves as individuals from each other, whereas intrinsically the truth is that we're all human beings, and people thousands of years ago have decided these paths for us by separating us out into different countries, into different nations, into different identities, forgetting that one truth, absolute truth, that we're all human beings and we only have one existence, and we should do the best with that existence together, because things are always better when we work together, aren't they? Look at what we've achieved as a society, and what more we could achieve if we truly work together and stopped seeing all these divisions and creating all these divisions of a place that we found ourselves upon, where everything is everything is there that we could possibly need. Anyway, so first of all, it was a YouTube video, my letter reply. I saw some videos underneath. I didn't see them before. I did put a reply there, but there were videos, and I don't know, it seems disingenuous to me that, I mean, the first video from the same individual, a YouTube account where they've interviewed some Israelis in one of them, and they've interviewed some Palestinians in the other, and the narrative across it is that all the Israelis say, yes, we'd love to live in peace, and all the Palestinians say, no, we don't want to live in peace. I don't know. I've heard both Palestinians and Israelis say give both answers, the affirmative and the negative, that yes, they'd like to live in peace, and no, they wouldn't. I mean, we know that two Israeli officials have been sanctioned by the UK government for the things they've said. We know that the lady that was on the Louis Theroux program that started that whole Promised Land, Pursuit of the Truth parts, which is a sort of part of it. I'm going to get into the Israel in a minute, but I just needed to talk about this because it interests me. I don't care about. I mean, Sorry, let me just, before I forget where I was going with that. Yes, the lady who's actually now been sanctioned by the UK government as well, for talking about she didn't want any Palestinians living in the area. I mean, if they'd interviewed that person, I can't remember her name, unfortunately, she would have definitely said, no, I want only Israelis living in the land. Now, I'm not trying to get, like I say, I'd like to strip all this away and just see it as human beings, which I would wonder whether God would look at it that way. But the thing is that when you're canvassing, and I know this because I've done it, it's easy, and especially with editing, because you did media, it's very easy if you want to create a narrative, and we see this in the media all the time, and it's pulled up in the clips that I'm going to mention, and what I've talked about recently is, this happens when you have a debate, unfortunately, with two sides who have differing views, is that you can easily just, if I want one out and I interviewed in a certain area with certain people that may be more amenable to things or maybe against things, you could get the argument that you're looking for, or you could even edit out the ones that differ from the narrative that you want to create. So I think it's disingenuous, because I don't believe that if you interviewed enough Palestinians and Jewish people, you would get the same yes and no's from either side of living in peace together or not. And for people, it worries me that people will watch these videos and then, I mean, if they don't do any research or haven't come across the counter of that, then they have a bias that they then think that, well, this means that, yes, this is the definitive answer to it, and are naive to the ways that people create agenda and narrative and their argument by only showing one side, or the side they want to show you because that's their argument. So I don't know. I mean, I would be surprised and horrified if you know, if that was the case. And I don't think it is, because I've heard interviews where Palestinians have been interviewed and say they want peace. I've heard Israelis say they want peace. I've heard Palestinians and Israelis both say they want to annihilate each other and they want the land for themselves. Obviously, there is also a reason why there may be more negative comments for the Palestinians, because of the recent history from 1948 of the occupation of land, the 1967 war, which led to the illegal occupation under international law of Israeli taking that land, the settlements recently, which is why the UK government sanctioned them, which is against international law. And that's why you might have them, Palestinians, also what's going on in Gaza, that where they may be more like, oh, well, I don't trust to live like this, and I want just the land for myself. I get why there may be that sentiment. The same as I would get why, not that I'm agreeing with it, but I would get why, say, also Israelis, because of the constant terrorist attacks from Hamas or from Hezbollah, and all this kind of stuff that's going on all the time, why they would also maybe not want to live with anyone else other than themselves, because they don't trust. I get that. So of course, if you interview around those areas, you could get those arguments. And if you maybe found people who are more, humanitarian, then you would get more like, no, let's all live together because we're all human beings. It doesn't matter, we're all human beings. But it just shows you that that's the world we live in, where people are creating division and people are believing in division. And to me, it's a bit disingenuous. And then there was another video about Islam influenced by paganism, because the Kaaba was before Muhammad, Prophet Muhammad. There was people that used to use that area, which they're actually detailed in the Quran, if I remember rightly, about he went in there and got rid of the idols, or maybe hadith, got rid of the idols and took it back, because the belief in Islam is that was built by Prophet Abraham, and that over time it got into the pagan hands and they carried on. So that wasn't, but I'm not trying to argument for each side. If you put on Google, is the Kaaba influence or Islam influence paganism, it will say, yeah, there are these examples. If you do it for Christianity, it will give you the same thing. Like the guy poo-pooed the idea of the Christmas tree. But we know that summer solstice, winter solstice, lots of other things could be argued in that way as well. Even in Judaism, if you search it, it'll give you the same thing. So if you want to get that argument that says, but you could get it for all three of them, that paganism influenced. And of course we know that the stories of the flood and the idea of Jesus is the cross and the sacrifice and all that thing appears in Egyptian and other societies pre-Judaism or Christianity. And so, if you want to, that to me, because I've heard lots of that, worries me and makes me think that, well, I don't understand then, maybe these are events that did actually take place and that's proof of it, or maybe this is the fact that other people have written upon this and taken those ideas like, writers do, plagiarism as it were, to take them on board. So if you wanted to be someone who was looking at religion in an anti-way, you could look at those points and pick up on those points. And I'm sure there's religious arguments to those that will say, no, it's because this and that and the other. So I think it's a little bit disingenuous, but I don't know. I don't know. It's what it shows me is that it's difficult to know these things, because all these religions are thousands of years old. They've all gone through times. There were times before them. Maybe there's explanations of why we believe Jesus was born, at the winter solstice time of the 25th of December, despite my understanding is that the Bible mentions a tree where Mary sits, and that would put it the birth would have been at a different time. There's no the fact of celebrating Christmas doesn't actually correlate to Christianity, but you can see how you can misinterpret, you can mislead, you can create this if if you've got an agenda. So, but what it shows to me truthfully, all of this, is how our bias plays a part in our perception and our appearance within the world, how we are divided by so much, and how easy it is for us to divide from each other all the time over every single thing, whether it's even like football, or whether it's world politics, or whether it's religion. We're I don't understand our propensity for division, and always wanting to be in this box and you be in that box, I be in this box, my box is better than your box, and all that kind of stuff. Which leads me to Iran and Israel, and there's more of that. There's interesting, Sky News, they interviewed both sides, from the Israeli government and from the Iranian. And what was interesting, like he points up this use, and I've noticed this as well in Iraq and Afghanistan, this use of the regime rather than the word of government. The amount of times that it's said after the country's name. I mean, I know W.G. Bush and Tony Blair used to do that with Iraq and Afghanistan. And it's an easy, like Big Brother 1984 kind of way to create in your mind, because that word regime, even though like regime just means like someone in control, but it has a negative connotation, whereas government doesn't. Well, does to some people, but majority, if you say regime, they think, oh, it's not a government, it's and therefore you instantly, by use of, and that's how the power of words, that you can instantly make in someone's mind the argument of good versus bad, or this side is right, this side is wrong, without even saying anything else. You've created that colour, that bias. And obviously some journalists, politicians, they use those words very carefully to create that image. They don't even need to say anything more. In your mind, even if you've only heard that one word, you've already created that picture. You already know the story, because this story is often retold. War is strength. So, yeah, it was interesting to hear him sort of bringing up Yalda Hakim, keep using the word regime, which he carried on using, and how many times that was used. And, I mean, maybe it is a regime. I don't know where the definition, is that just where a government is not elected, or is it where, like they would, I don't know, would they use that with Russia as well? He's elected, but Putin's been there for ages, much like Benjamin Netanyahu seems to have been. I didn't know he's been there since 2015, because they talk about the JPA, the deal in 2015 that was struck between Iran and was it America or the West to stop weaponizing uranium or nuclear material, which Donald Trump got rid of because he didn't want to pay all that money, and now he's trying to get a deal back again. But just what is all of this? It's all division again, isn't it? That's what this all is. The preemptive strike by Israel because they fear, and I get it, that why a country, if they fell truly, the problem is I live in the age of the 45-minute warning and of the weapons of mass destruction, of the lie that was told by Tony Blair and George W. Bush, who lied to their public about these things, or the intelligence that was given to them. Maybe they weren't the ones that were actually lying, and they were fed it by warmongering, financially advantaged generals or intelligence agencies. I don't know, who knows, but we all know that there were no weapons of mass destruction. That's borne out by proof in time, and the fact of that they didn't have weapons that were capable of striking the UK within 45 minutes, and all that kind of stuff that we all know about. The illegal war using UN regulations, which Kofi Annan, when he left office, and this always happens when people leave office, suddenly they become able to talk about things. He said that yes, it was an illegal war, whereas before he couldn't say it. And all this stuff. So I live in that generation. And therefore, because of that, I'm dubious when someone says, oh, wow, this country, they've got these things and this idea. I mean, we all know that Iran have often said that they, deaf to Israel and deaf to America. We know that's their slogans. Assume that's true. I mean, like, again, like this journalist brought to my attention, is most of my information is based on what I've seen on the news media. And it depends, like I'm talking at the beginning of these YouTube videos, it's easy for someone to be persuaded of a view of a bias because we're fed this information. We're, as individuals, unable to verify it. We're trusting those elected, we're trusting those broadcasters and journalists that they don't have bias. We all know everyone has bias. And so, and obviously journalism likes to play hyperbole and division and all that kind of stuff for the excitement of the story. So we don't, I'm basing things on what I've been told throughout, the time that I've lived here. So, but I can't verify any of this, but I've got all this information in my head like we all do, and we're navigating through that, and that's why it's very easy to be misled. So, yes, so that does worry me. Did they really have, because I can see that Iran don't seem to have the ability to do very much to Israel at the moment. But maybe that's because Israel have done a very good job at getting rid of the ballistic missiles. Or maybe Iran were overcompensating what they had because they want to make out they're this big empire. It's just a shame. It's a shame for the individuals. That's the thing. These world leaders, whether they're the Iranian leader or supreme leader or presidents and prime ministers, is all their agendas that we're all living with, all their divisive agendas that we're all living with, because they are on the throne of these past people who gave them power and possession, and they want to hold on to all of this. All of them do, but they do it in different ways. And yet it's us individuals who are governed by them who we give that idea to, because we see that there's no better solution, or it's the only solution we've come to and we were brought up in it. And yet it's us who suffer. The Iranian people, I'm sure that if all people being equal were shown, because the thing is, like, when you're born into a, say, like, if you're an Iranian child, and if it is really, an autocratic society where, you see on the TV of them being, they shoot you if you say something against them, and, everyone has to live in fear, like Stasi, like, you see in, like, 1984 and that kind of thing, or Fahrenheit 451 or whatever it is, Ray Bradbury, that kind of, if it's really like that, if you're brought up in that world, then you're coloured by that. Like we all are. We're all coloured by the time and the place that we're born in. If that same child was born in the West, they would have a different life, a different mindset. It's not actually that individuals, it's the surrounding that colours them. Like clay is coloured and then it becomes that. So therefore, who's really to blame for that is those individuals. Unfortunately, all of us are party to the place and time we're born in, and pick up that and forget that we're all human beings, because we're not made, that's not made important to us. It's made important to you of, your culture, your society, your nationality, rather than your humanity. Because everyone wants their own power, their own domain, their own kingdom. But anyway, so that's the unfortunate thing, because it then breeds all this division that goes down the line, and those soldiers carry on, keep being born. That hatred carries on, keep going. That divisiveness carries on, where people will defend what they know to be, because that's all they know to be. If they were born somewhere else, they would defend something else. Unfortunately, we don't live in intrinsic truths where we can all suddenly see that, this would be a much better way to live, all of us together, united, without wars, without weapons, without nuclear bombs, without the need for all these things, so that we could safeguard our world and prosper within it with all the stuff that we've been given freely, with all the time and energy that we've been given freely, rather than dividing ourselves and pitting ourselves against each other to say that I'm better than you, or I'm more intelligent than you, or I should control this or control you, or all these things that all these people in charge. And it's not even their fault, because they're products of the same system that we're all born into, because they will see it as the right thing to do, as I'm defending this and that and the other. And I get it, within the system it makes sense, until you realize that, wait a minute, we're all human beings, and why do we choose this system, this way of living with each other? Anyway, here's the videos showing different sides, the argument for and the way the media and propaganda and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of all of it, we'll all come out with a view at the end of it, and each one of us will have a different view. And that begs the question of, well, that's very difficult then to find the truth if we can all come up with different views. But what really happens out of all of this is that it just endorses the division in humanity. And that's such a shame, that we're all going to die at some stage, and we'll all die divided. Humanity will die divided of each other, and of the beauty of the existence, if you believe in God that he gave us, or if you don't, the ability that we could all live together and not divided. But unfortunately, that seems a long way off, if indeed it ever does happen. It's such a shame, and these Sky News things are just proof of the products of that division, of that system that we're born into. Take care, take it easy, God bless, and peace.
Hello, very good morning. Thanks for joining us here on The Breakfast Show. Our top story here today, waves of Iranian missiles have triggered sirens across much of Israel, killing at least 3 people and injuring dozens. The barrage, dubbed Operation Severe Punishment, is in retaliation for Israel's attack on Iran's nuclear program and military targets. Well, Israel's strikes killed at least 78 people, including 4 Iranian commanders. Well, as explosions struck Tel Aviv, Benjamin Netanyahu warned more attacks are on the way as he pled with Iranians to stand up to the regime in Tehran. Well, let's speak to our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, who's in Jerusalem for us. Morning to you, Alistair. Talk us through what kind of a night it's been there, then.
Well, it's been a long night. It's been a difficult night for many. Millions spending their night in shelters as wave after wave of Iranian missile strikes came into the country. And there's been the loud noises of interceptions, some impacts, particularly in the Tel Aviv area, windows being rattled. So it's been a tough night for people in Israel, but it was anticipated after Israel launched those attacks in the early hours of Friday morning on Iran. Those attacks are continuing overnight, in particular around the Iranian capital, Tehran, and throughout today, as Israel is still looking to try and at least severely degrade, if not eliminate, Iran's nuclear capabilities, but also take out much of its military infrastructure, some of its key personnel. And Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's prime minister, speaking last night, talking about bringing freedom to the Iranian people, sending a message to the Iranian people saying that Israel stands with them. Whether or not that message will be felt in Iran, I think, is another matter. But it did seem to indicate that perhaps whether it is a key objective or whether or not it might be a byproduct of what Israel is doing, the idea of regime change is certainly in the minds of Israel's leaders.
Alistair, thanks very much indeed. Well, the two sides were urged to show restraint during an emergency United Nations Security Council meeting in New York. But as Iran accused the United States of being complicit in Israel's attack, the US was again threatening Tehran to sign a nuclear deal.
The United States was informed of the strikes ahead of time, but was not militarily involved in these strikes. The United States will continue to seek a diplomatic resolution that ensures Iran will never acquire a nuclear weapon or pose a threat to stability in the Middle East. Iran's leadership would be wise to negotiate at this time.
Well, our correspondent Adam Parsons is here with me. So, Adam, give us a sense of what the international response has been.
Well, you heard a taste of it there from the United Nations, with the Americans saying, well, we need to keep these talks going on about Iran's nuclear capability. Well, good luck with that, because the Iranians have said that any further talks would be meaningless. I think we are way beyond, at the moment, a point where any talks are going to happen. This is effectively, we're either in the foothills of a war or we're in a conflict now at the moment. But it's a difficult geopolitical one. You've got now a whole load of world leaders saying the same thing. We need to de-escalate, we need to move away from the military, we need to look at a diplomatic solution. And those are very emollient, nice words to be saying in rooms like the UN. But in the reality, in Israel and in Iran, we're seeing missiles being exchanged between the two countries. So what you need to look at is what ends this now, or where does this lead to? And right at the heart of this is the role of the United States. Now, they're talking about a diplomatic solution, but equally you saw that sort of message from Donald Trump yesterday saying the next attacks would be much more brutal, saying all the people who tried to resist this were now dead. What are Iran's possibilities here? Well, one thing is that regime in Iran, by the accounts of many diplomats, is weak. Now, on the one hand, and you were hearing Alistair saying, the Israelis think there's an opportunity for regime change. On the others, there are plenty on the ground who think that this regime will not go down without a fight, and that they have a lot of missiles which they could launch. Not necessarily all at Israel either. There are suggestions that Iran is looking at plans to attack, for instance, Saudi Arabia. Were the Saudis to come in behind Israel or behind America to attack desalination plants, incredibly important to the future of Israel. They could attack American bases in Qatar and Bahrain, for instance. So the Americans are assumed by the Iranians to be supporting Israel, whatever they might say. The Russians, on the other hand, clearly rolling in behind Iran, and that's where this becomes very tense, is because you have the classic two superpowers facing off against each other in the UN. And at the same point, you have a lot of, particularly I think European diplomats, Emmanuel Macron said this yesterday, while we're all being distracted now by what is happening between Iran and Israel, let's not lose sight of what is happening in Gaza. These are lots of leaders who have been forthright about saying that what is happening in Gaza needs to be addressed as well. I mean, ultimately, this is an enormously complex situation, not least because Benjamin Netanyahu feels himself politically somewhat trapped, but emboldened by what's happened over the past couple of years. He thinks this is a chance to cut off the head of what he sees of an Iranian hydra, but the stakes are enormously high.
Yeah, still so many questions about what might happen next. Adam, thanks very much indeed. The Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, and US President Donald Trump agreed that diplomacy and dialogue are needed to de-escalate tensions. That was during a phone call last night. Let's get the latest from Westminster. Our political correspondent, Amanda Acas, is there for us. So, Amanda, what exactly is the UK position on all this then?
Well, the UK government's position is fairly clear. They repeated it throughout the day yesterday, calling for calm, calling for restraint, calling for diplomacy and de-escalation. What is also clear is that neither Israel nor Iran are paying much attention to what the UK or indeed other European leaders have to say about this. Sir Keir Starmer had a day of telephone diplomacy yesterday, as well as chairing COBRA, the COBRA meeting of ministers and military leaders. He spoke to President Macron, Chancellor Merz yesterday, the three of them agreeing on the importance of a diplomatic solution as opposed to military action, which was a message he then took on his phone call to Prime Minister Netanyahu, also acknowledging Israel's right to self-defense and expressing his grave concerns about the Iranian nuclear program, but still calling for de-escalation. Again, he then spoke to Donald Trump yesterday evening, even less detail given to us in the readout from that conversation, so I think it was probably fairly brief, and stressing the importance of diplomacy and dialogue once again. Now, David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, spoke to his Iranian counterpart with a very similar message, we're told, of calm and restraint, also urging the Iranians to take part in a negotiated settlement as proposed by Donald Trump, of course. Now, overnight it appears that they've said that that would be entirely meaningless given the strikes from Israel. I think the UK government position is interesting in the sense that they have really stressed the fact that they had nothing to do with the strikes that happened yesterday, and also have made it clear that at the moment at least they're not prepared to take part in any defence of Israel from Iranian retaliation as they did previously during Iranian attacks on Israel when RAF Typhoons helped to shoot down drones, although that position could of course change. That's different from the position of President Trump and President Macron, but of course relations between the UK and Israel have deteriorated recently over the UK's pressure over the issue of Gaza sanctioning Israeli ministers. Now, Sir Keir Starmer today, he's heading off to Canada for meetings there ahead of the G7, and clearly that summit is going to be dominated by this conflict.
Very much indeed. Well, we can get more on this. Joining me live from Jerusalem is Oren Marmerstein, an Israeli Foreign Ministry spokesperson. Mr. Marmerstein, thank you for joining us on Sky News. What is the latest you can tell us about the extent of the Iranian attacks on Israel in response?
Samantha, it's good to be with you. First, perhaps we should say a word. Why are we at this moment? We're trying to remove an existential threat, actually a double existential threat. The Iranian regime, the Mullah regime, has been getting closer and closer to be at a point in which they have a nuclear weapon, and also, and this is the second existential threat, to be in a point in which they have industrial scale of ballistic missiles. So in a way, we were at the 11th hour, and this is what we're trying to do, to remove this existential threat.
Yes, we heard that from Mr. Netanyahu. My question really was about, I mean, you've had people spending the night in bomb shelters. As we're speaking now, what is the current status in terms of the intensity of the attacks from Iran on Israel?
So you mentioned the bomb shelters. Me and my family, my wife and daughters, we spent the night in the shelter. Actually, we had people that were murdered, that were killed because of the attacks in a city called Rishon LeZion. Originally, I'm from there, and terrible pictures. People trying to take cover, and I think what makes the difference in this terrible attack is that the Iranian regime is targeting population centers. We are doing everything possible, and I think your correspondent just mentioned it, to avoid harming civilians. The Iranians are going after civilians.
Not in Gaza, though.
How are you explaining to Israelis why they're needing to spend the night in bomb shelters, why mothers are trying to comfort their children when the walls of their apartments are shaking? How are you explaining it to them, and how long are you telling them to prepare for it to continue?
Perhaps the best way to explain how we're explaining, I'll share with you how I explained it to my 9-year-old daughter when we rushed her into the shelter. I told her that in a very foul place called Iran, there is a very extreme regime, the Mullah regime, and they are doing everything possible to get their hands around the most dangerous weapon humankind ever known, nuclear weapon. And that's why we are undergoing these difficulties, but it's in order for us to be safe. And actually, it's not only for us, Israel, to be safe. The idea is to make this place, the world, a safer place, because those missiles, those ballistic missiles, can get all the way to Europe, to the UK. And this is a threat and this is a danger. But of course, Israel is in the forefront, in the front of this war and in this operation. But in a way, we're doing the job for all of us to be safer.
Yes, I mean, we heard an update from your military yesterday. It seemed to be a long-term planned attack. How much damage can you assess that you've already done to the nuclear capability of Iran with what has happened so far?
So the first round of activity of the operation was very successful. Nuclear sites were severely damaged, and all the weapon scientists, all the generals were involved in trying to get Iran to this point of no return, were also severely damaged. So I think we can look at a very successful point of operation.
Okay, so Ms. Mohammed, if it was successful, can it now stop? Or is what Israel's looking for is regime change in Iran?
That was my next sentence. It's not done. We have still work to do, because the scale, just to give you an idea, the Iranian regime was trying to get itself with a capability of producing 300 missiles, ballistic missiles a month. This is something that for a tiny country like Israel could be catastrophic. So there's much work to be done, but the first round, the first stage of the operation was very successful.
But are you trying to foment regime change within Iran? Because you haven't just gone after the nuclear capability, have you? You've gone after military personnel and military installments inside Iran.
So basically, we're going after those who are trying to kill us, those who pose a threat. And the goal, the objective of this operation is very clear: to remove this threat, to remove this existential threat. And I hear about other analyses, other ideas. This is the core idea, the core objective is to remove the threat.
Did you have no confidence in the US talks with Iran, the nuclear talks?
Of course, we have a lot of confidence, and the Americans are our closest ally, and we have a correspondence and communication with them on a daily basis, and a very intimate relationship. And of course, the Americans were informed. And yes, I think what we're doing is helping all of us to be in a safer world after removing this nuclear threat coming from Iran.
Did the Americans support what you did?
Well, they gave weapons.
So like I said, the Americans were informed. I think
It's different, though, from being informed to being supportive, isn't it?
And again, my next sentence would be, I think the Americans are quite able to communicate their message by themselves, and President Trump is doing it in a very clear way.
Your administration has warned Israelis abroad to avoid displaying Jewish or Israeli symbols. Have you a message for British Jews?
So I think you're right. Yeah. Unfortunately, in these circumstances, in these times, when Israel is involved in trying to protect itself, often it is the case that Israelis and Jews are being attacked. So unfortunately, with the rise of anti-Semitic hatred and the attacks against Jews, I think, yes, it is very important to be cautious. I can also here, of course, relate to Israelis because I'm an Israeli official, but for Israelis, we're saying, yes, it is time to be cautious. It's time to be wise because, as you know, many are trying to attack us. Also in the UK, just recently, people try to attack the Israeli embassy. So yes, it's important to be very safe and cautious.
And what support are you expecting from the governments of the UK, the US, and indeed Europe?
I think those countries, those governments that you mentioned, acknowledge the threat. They know that the world with nuclear Iran is a very, very unsafe world. So I think here, the most important thing is that once you acknowledge the threat, You should acknowledge the right of Israel to defend itself. And this is what we're doing.
Iran has made no secret of the intensity with which it will retaliate. It's talking about Israel burning. Have you put special measures in place to protect your own military commanders and politicians?
So everyone is planned, and we're doing everything possible to make everyone safe, unlike other regimes and other entities that unfortunately we need to fight, in which they protect only the military echelons. In Israel, we protect everyone, including families, civilians, and people who have official roles. So we are taking every measure to make sure everyone is safe.
All right, Mr. Oren Marmerstein, thank you very much for your time on Sky News.
Parsons reporting there. Well, let's get an Israeli perspective on what comes next. Joining me now is Chuck Freilich, former Deputy National Security Advisor in Israel. Thank you so much, Mr. Freilich, for joining us here on the program. Do you believe that this was a risk worth taking for Benjamin Netanyahu? In the short term, it does appear that Israel has struck key infrastructure and exposed Iran's vulnerabilities. But could this tip the whole region into a new kind of war and cause mass casualties in Israel?
Well, I think people, when they talk about events like this, and the media like to take the worst case possibilities, which are possibilities. Nobody can say for sure that this will not expand into a significantly broader war. But I think that that's actually a low probability. What does a broader war mean? It means that the Iranians try and attack American bases in the region. That brings the United States in. They can try and attack the Arab states. That also brings the United States in. That's, I believe, totally counterproductive from an Iranian perspective, because they know what happens if the U.S. Gets involved and they have enough difficulty with Israel. So I'm less concerned about.
I guess the question, Mr. Freilich, is how does this end? It's a question that General Petraeus often asks. You know, tell me how this ends.
Well, we're in the second day of the war, and again, the war has its own timetable. The media have a different timetable. This may last for a couple of weeks. And how it ends, I would imagine that the U.S. will have to play a major role. I think the objective is for it to end in a diplomatic agreement. And the real end game is to put pressure on the Iranians to agree to the kinds of concessions that they have refused to accept until now, to coerce them into doing it. That's, in one form or another, it will probably end in a diplomatic agreement.
If they do, though, continue their launching their ballistic missiles, is there a chance that perhaps Israel's air defenses are ultimately overwhelmed?
There is that possibility, but that's why Israel has spent much of the last few days focusing on their the ballistic missile capability. And of course, it hasn't, and it will not be reduced to zero, but it's been reduced significantly. And we'll have to see how it plays out. Hopefully, the possibility that you're talking about will not happen.
Yeah, I guess, you know, would you then say a key factor of this is sort of the ballistic missiles that Iran could continue to launch on Israel, Israel needing the interceptors? The big question is, you know, how much is the United States willing to step in and support Israel in that, while Israel continues to try and decapitate Iran's leadership, but also take out those ballistic missiles as quickly as possible?
Well, I think President Trump has demonstrated strong support in these last 2 days, and the U.S. has been involved in the defensive operations from the very beginning. So I don't think there's a question of whether the U.S. will help here. I think you have to put this whole thing in perspective. I mean, why is Israel doing this? And the answer is that this is really something which has been in the works for 30 years now. And we've had the Islamic Republic ever since it was established in 1979, repeatedly calling for Israel's destruction. Almost a day doesn't go by without it. And it's not just rhetoric. It's the nuclear program, it's the ballistic missile program, it's the vast sums that they invest in Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis and others. It's the fact that we know that they were party to a pre-October 7th plan with Hamas. The war, October 7th, wasn't just about...
I understand that this has been an ambition of Benjamin Netanyahu's for decades, for 30 years. He's talked about this at every twist and turn. But the director for non-proliferation policy at the US-based Arms Control Association said Israel's prime minister did not present any clear or compelling evidence that Iran was on the brink of weaponizing. So why now?
Because so he decided that it wasn't a compelling case, and he may be right, but experts have been known to be wrong in the past, as have intelligence agencies. But there is information that the Iranians have renewed the weapons group in recent months, and they were taking measures to be able to reach an actual capability in a much shorter time frame. And this is viewed in Israel as an existential threat. I think most of the world agrees with Israel. Certainly, the leading Western countries have always agreed that it is an existential threat to Israel. And I think that's why we've seen the strong support from President Trump and President Macron and the Chancellor in Germany. And I regret that Britain has been less positive than they have.
But I guess the other question is this about Benjamin Netanyahu's survival as well? There were a 6th round of talks that were going to take place in Oman tomorrow. That's now not going to happen. And Benjamin Netanyahu has been under a lot of pressure over the way in which he's prosecuted the war in Gaza. So did he need this for his own survival and political capital?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. And that is, of course, part of the picture. But the fact that there are political considerations here, there are always politics in all big decisions. But the fact that Netanyahu is fighting his own battle doesn't take away from the fact that Iran has presented a growing threat, an existential threat for decades. And I don't believe that any other state that faces this kind of threat would behave differently. So you can have two truths at the same time.
Chuck Freilich, thank you so much for joining us here on the program. Israel was able to limit the damage from last night's aerial attack by Tehran thanks to its air defense systems, but even those can be overwhelmed, as we discussed there in that interview, when the number of incoming missiles becomes impossible to contain. One of the key questions now is what Iran still has left in its arsenal and how that stacks up with Israel's. Our military analyst, Michael Clark, has been taking a look.
Israel and Iran have both been preparing for this confrontation for decades, so how do they stack up? Well, on paper, Iran far outnumbers Israel in terms of active and reserve personnel. Iran is a much bigger country than Israel, 86 million people to Israel's 10 million people. So the Iranians have got 960,000 personnel, Israel have got 634,000. But this war, of course, won't be about who has the more manpower. It's really about who has the best technology, particularly in the air war. And on that score, there is a clear and obvious winner. So let's look at the attack capabilities. Now, first, Israel's weapon of choice. Of course, there are its fighter jets, the F-15, the F-16, and the F-35. Very stealthy, the F-35 can get through radar defenses undetected. Very, very useful weapon system for the Israelis to operate. The Iranians, they operate much older Russian jets, and they've lost some of them. They don't work as well. And so instead, they've built up a huge stockpile of missiles and drones. And they include the Shahed 136 that we've seen much of in Ukraine, the Imad, the Khorram Shah, big missile, but this one, the Fatah. There's a whole family of Fatah missiles. They work. The most modern versions of them are thought to be hypersonic, which are really very difficult to defend against. In total, it's estimated that the Iranians may have 3,000 of these ballistic missiles. Most estimates would say it's probably nearer 2,000, but undoubtedly they have a lot of them, and they could keep throwing them at Israel over the coming days and weeks if they chose to do that. And Israel claims that Iran was building up the capacity to manufacture 300 ballistic missiles a month. And that, with their ranges, would put Israel and hundreds of US bases in the crosshairs around the region. So if you look at a range map, undoubtedly, the Iranians have a big capacity building in terms of their ballistic missiles and their drones. Now, over the years, Israel has the most advanced defense system in the world, and it's built it up. And it's getting support from United States assets in the region. And that system, most people call it the Iron Dome, but Iron Dome is only one type of missile. So there's the Iron Dome missile itself, there's David Sling, which is a high-altitude, short-range, very fast missile, and there's the Arrow 3. Probably the best of the whole bit is the Arrow 3. That probably works the best of all. But between them, as well as with some Patriot missiles, they create this sense of a dome, a multi-layered dome that sits on top of their population centers that can cover the whole country, because it's a small country, and give them close to 100% protection. But of course, no system will ever give you 100% protection. Now, you can see here, action over Tel Aviv. A few missiles did get through, but the vast majority were intercepted. But no system is ever 100%, because any system can be overwhelmed with sheer numbers. And in that respect, we know that Iran does have the numbers. But in contrast, Iran's air defenses are older, they're weaker, and they've been badly hurt by Israel already. Now, the IDF have actually looked at some of these systems. The S-300, an old Russian system, doesn't work that well these days if you know where it is, the Korad 15 and the Tactical Hunter. They're okay, but they're quite old. And the IDF has released these images of them attacking Iranian surface-to-air missiles near Tehran.
So like
and there they are. If they can spot them, they can destroy them. They've got enough intelligence to know where they are, even those which are mobile, like the S-300. Once they've spot them, then effectively they're dead if the Israelis decide to go for them. Finally, Israel has the one thing that they don't want Iran to have: nuclear weapons. The Jericho-2, which is a nuclear weapon-tipped missile. The Israelis will never confirm or deny whether they have nuclear weapons, and they deny that they are running a nuclear program in this way, but we all know that they are. They have the Jericho-2, it is nuclear. The Iranians would love to have what the Israelis have had for years. And in response to these attacks, the Iranians talk a very good game. They talk big, and they can certainly hurt Israel. But in a war of the skies, which this is going to be for some time yet, Tel Aviv certainly has the upper hand.
As Professor Michael Clark there, you're watching a special program on a spokesperson of Israel's foreign ministry. Well, Benjamin Netanyahu has named this assault on Iran as Operation Rising Lion and called on Iranians to rise up in a revolt against the supreme leader. Well, let's bring in Professor Saeed Mohammad Marandi, a former advisor to Iran's nuclear negotiation team. Professor Marandi, thank you very much for joining us here on the program. Did Iran majorly miscalculate? Because even now, President Trump is providing Iran with an off-ramp, telling them to come to the negotiating table. At what point will Iran take that offer?
Well, according to your narrative, Iran always miscalculates. It's a regime. I heard the regime 20 times in the last 10 minutes as I was listening. You sound like TASS news agency upgraded during the Soviet Union. And you say the regime is unpopular and is killing its people. When General Soleimani was murdered by the same Trump that you talk about, millions of people came to the streets of this city, Tehran, that I'm in. So how is it that he's so unpopular? This propaganda that you're producing is only justifying aggression. What the Israeli regime did was aggression. What it did was unjustified aggression. And Netanyahu has been saying for over 30 years, some say up to 40 years, he's been saying that Iran's on the verge of creating a nuclear weapon. And thanks to people like you, he gets away with these lies. But people can go online and check how many times he said.
Professor Marandi, if you could just focus on, I know your narrative and I know the line you take, and we've spoken a number of times, and I'm sure, but if you could just focus on answering the question, in terms of the nuclear talks, on day 60, as far as we know, Donald Trump had said Iran has 60 days. Israel attacked on the 61st day. Can we talk a little bit about the regime's competence levels, the intelligence and security, the competence of your intelligence and security agencies, the fact that Mossad was able to build drone sites in your country, the fact that the leadership was asleep in their beds when they were struck and that you ignored these warnings. Can we talk a little bit about the fact that the regime was taken completely by surprise and top leaders have now been decapitated and killed as a result of the Israeli attack?
Saying regime, I think it helps you contain your contempt for independent countries. after all, you work for Sky News. It's understandable. But the regime, how do you know that the Israeli regime had bases inside Iran? You're just repeating their propaganda. Of course, Israel for you is not a regime, sorry, it's a state. But it's a genocidal state carrying out extermination in Gaza, but that's not really important. But how do you know
So are you denying that the top commanders are being killed? Are you denying that top commanders were killed?
Oh, so you mean what you're referring to basically is an attack, an act of aggression, that they suddenly fire missiles at civilian targets at apartment buildings and slaughter people in those apartment buildings, slaughtering whole families. For you, that's targeting. That's a really sophisticated act.
But if I can just ask, have military facilities been hit? Have nuclear facilities been hit?
One of the buildings that had some of these commanders, one or two of these commanders, was a large apartment building where they killed everyone. 60 people, 20 children. That's not important for people like you, but that's important for people like us. For you, people like you who support ethno-supremacism and the chosen people being able to slaughter and exterminate
Professor
Palestinians.
Marandi, I'm just trying to get the perspective. We're trying to give you airtime so that you can give us the Iranian perspective on this. And we want to know, and I want to understand, Iran's position here. Will you come to the negotiating table now? Donald Trump, after these series of airstrikes and this attack was launched, called on Iran to come back to the negotiating table. As the spokesperson of the regime, or as someone who worked closely with the negotiating team, do you believe they will come to the negotiating table now?
Well, your regime should know, and your news agency or your TV channel should know better. We were at the negotiating table. It was Trump that conspired with Netanyahu to attack Iran. This is how you twist the truth. You shouldn't invite me because you're easily exposed. Iran was negotiating. Initially, Trump had one position, and so did Witkoff. And then they flipped and said no enrichment. And then they continued the negotiations. And the night before the attack, Trump said that we don't want war. And then after the attack, he said, we're all for it. And you're saying Iran? Is Iran going to come back to the negotiating table? The audacity. Come on, show at least a bit of integrity. A bit of integrity will help.
Okay, Professor Marandi, thanks again for joining us here on the program. I just want to bring you some breaking news and move away from the Israel-Iran story for a moment. We know that the authorities have...
This is Donald Trump.
On Iran tonight. If we are attacked in any way, shape or form by Iran, the full strength and might of the US armed forces will come down on you at levels never seen before. However, we can easily get a deal done between Iran and Israel and end this bloody conflict. Well, our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, is in Jerusalem for us this morning. Hi there, Alistair. Get us up to date with the strikes overnight.
Well, it came in two waves around 3 a.m. this morning. So fewer missiles, I think, at least from kind of what I could see, fewer missiles fired than the night before. We'll wait and see what the IDF say about exact numbers. But the damage done is pretty significant. I think 4 dead in a village close to Haifa in the north, and then 6 have been killed and more than 200 wounded around the Tel Aviv area. There is still an operation going on in the district of Bat Yam, where a number of people are still believed to be trapped in a building. So emergency services are trying to rescue them from that. So a difficult night for Israelis, but at the same time, the Israeli bombardment of Iran has not really let up. In fact, actually, it's expanded. We've seen targeting gas refineries, so an expansion of the scope of the Israeli operation, perhaps linked to the fact that Iran has targeted civilian areas in Israel. That is continuing. We're told nothing is off limits. We're told that the Israeli Air Force will now be operating over the capital, Tehran, with pretty much freedom of movement, not entirely risk-free, but they think they have eliminated air defences sufficiently there to allow them to operate over Tehran. And bit by bit, as we enter the third day of this war, they are eliminating Iranian targets.
Alistair, thanks very much indeed. Well, meanwhile, the UK is moving jets to the Middle East after Iran threatened to target the bases of the UK, US and France in the region if they were to help Israel. Well, let's cross to Westminster. Our political correspondent, Amanda Acas, is there. And Amanda, what's the government saying about this decision to move their military assets?
Well, the Prime Minister has said he and UK allies are very concerned about the conflict spreading, a wider escalation across the Middle East, and that is behind this decision to send UK planes out there to bolster the presence already there. So we understand that is Typhoon fast jets and also air-to-air refueling aircrafts. Now, this follows an announcement from the Iranians yesterday suggesting that US, UK and French military assets, air bases, naval vessels in the area would be attacked in retaliation for any support for Israel in defending itself from any Iranian attacks in future. Now, interestingly, this is something that the UK government has so far not been willing to comment on. The Prime Minister made this announcement about sending the jets out there on board a government plane heading out to Canada for the G7 and for meetings with Mark Carney over this weekend. And asked about this, he said, well, he couldn't say for operational reasons, that it's a fast-moving situation and the priority of the British government is de-escalation, calm and restraint and so on, those messages that we've heard again and again across the weekend. But the US and the French have been more outspoken in saying that they would be prepared to support Israel in defending itself against Iran if asked. Now, this is something that the UK government have done previously. So last year, when Israel was under attack from Iranian rockets, then RAF planes were involved in shooting down drones. But obviously there has been a bit of a deterioration in relations since then, given the UK pressure on Gaza. But clearly that's not something the Prime Minister has ruled out now. He's off to the he's having talks with Mark Carney today and tomorrow, and being part of the G7. And clearly the spread of this conflict is going to be a key focus of those talks.
Yes, I'm sure that's right. Amanda, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. And just to let you know that tonight, Yalda...
You're watching Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. Israel has carried out further attacks on Iran, claiming that it's hitting nuclear and missile facilities. In response, Iran has carried out another wave of attacks overnight, including on Tel Aviv, where 8 deaths have been reported. In the last hour, the Chancellor told this programme that the UK military assets are moving into the region and could potentially support our allies there. Now, the last time there was an international deal with Iran to monitor and contain its nuclear program, the JCPOA, I think it's the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, it was signed for the UK by our Foreign Secretary then, Lord Hammond. And I can speak to Lord Hammond now live. Good morning, Lord Hammond.
Good morning.
You spent a lot of time with Iranian leaders, talking to them. How would you rate their desire and capacity for an all-out war with Israel?
Well, I think the Iranian regime today is a very different one from the one we were dealing with in 2015, because it's been severely weakened by the events of the last 18 months, 2 years. It is now alone and largely friendless in the region. And I think it's much weaker than it was. So the discussions, the talks that have been going on between Iran and the US, I suspect had a different flavor to them, where the regime in Iran has moved its focus from exporting its ideology to surviving. And like all autocratic regimes, when the chips are down, the number one priority invariably becomes survival of the regime. And I would have expected that the Iranians would be keen to do a deal with the Americans. It may be that that is not inconsistent with stepping up pressure by moving to breakout point and weaponization in their program on the ground. But one person who will not be keen for a deal between the Americans and the Iranians, any more than he was keen for us to do the JCPOA deal in 2015, is Benjamin Netanyahu. The Israelis do not want to see deals done. They didn't like the JCPOA.
How long has
They
Netanyahu been
wouldn't
in
like
power?
a deal now between Iran and the US. The Israelis want to see a more permanent and, as they would see it, more sustainable and guaranteed end to the Iranian program through its dismantlement, but either by military action or by regime change.
Is it your opinion, though, that the Americans can, if you like, bring the Israelis to the table, or can the Israelis simply stand in the way of a new deal?
I think the Israelis are standing in the way of a new deal. I think the actions that have been taken make it virtually impossible for the regime in Iran to reach a deal with the Americans and to survive. Their credibility at home would be shot. And the regime itself is riven with tensions. There are many different factions within the Iranian regime, many different focuses of power, if you like, IRGC, military, the supreme leader, etc. So I think that the Israeli preemptive attack has effectively put paid, at least for now, to any prospect of a deal to halt Iran's nuclear weapons program.
So with the Israelis in one corner saying that they will strike every potential site of danger and threat, the Iranians in a situation where essentially doing anything other than escalation, risk, humiliation, how can it possibly be resolved?
Well, it's going to be very difficult to de-escalate the situation, and obviously that is what everybody is now trying to do. I rather agree with the comment that Emily Thornberry made a few moments ago. I very much doubt that the Israelis have got the capability to permanently destroy Iran's deep underground nuclear facilities. So they will have the ability, by destroying overground infrastructure, to slow down the program, perhaps to disrupt it for months or even years. But that isn't quite the same as permanently destroying the underground facilities. So I don't think that Israeli action alone, unless it leads to regime change, is going to permanently take Iran out of the nuclear game. And clearly, Netanyahu has effectively recognized that by calling for regime change as the apparently the principal target of the Israeli action.
I've read that the one, if you like, halfway house that the Israelis might be pursuing, and I'll ask Mark Urban about this in a moment, that they may not be able to destroy the underground site, but what they might be able to do is to deny the Iranians access by destroying the roads and the infrastructure that would take troops and the scientists and so on into those sites.
Yeah, as I said, I think they can damage, slow down, maybe temporarily halt the program by destroying overground infrastructure. But I mean, the Iranians have been planning for this attack for many, many years. It would be naive to think that they won't have prepared contingency plans for either continuing to operate or resurrecting in a reasonable period of time those underground facilities. I don't know this, but I would assume that they will have multiple routes in and out, that they will have substantial underground supplies, stores, so that they can operate despite the destruction of overground infrastructure. This isn't a new idea. Even at the time of the JCPOA in 2015, this debate was going on about how much military damage could actually be done to these facilities with the weapons that were available. And we just heard that only the Americans have the bunker busting weapons that would be able to take out these deep underground facilities. I don't think we even know that that is the case, that even the Americans could do this with conventional weapons. These are very deep facilities buried under solid rock structures, and will be very challenging for anybody to destroy.
The Chancellor told me this morning that we are moving our assets into place to support our allies. Now, if you were still Foreign Secretary, what would you be, first of all, saying to the Israelis after Mr. Netanyahu's essentially, as you pointed out, direct appeal to the Iranians, essentially for regime change? And what would you be thinking about that phrase, support for our allies? How far could we go?
Well, the UK has been involved previously in purely defensive actions, intercepting incoming missiles towards Israel. Israel has perfectly strong capability to intercept missiles, but of course, these defensive systems can be overwhelmed by sheer scale of attack, and that is why in the past allies have assisted at moments of peak threat to intercept missiles where there are multiple threats incoming. The UK has capabilities to do that, for example, using our Type 45 destroyers, air defense systems, using air-launched interception systems. We've got an airbase on Cyprus, which is close by. We've got other naval assets in the region, and we've got access to basing facilities of allies in the Gulf. So we have a number of options available to us. I think what the government will be trying to do is ensure that we have options available to us without committing to doing anything at the moment. As this story evolves, and hopefully we move to a diplomatic phase where there is a de-escalation, the UK will be in a position to be able to potentially offer or threaten to use its assets in the region to be part of an international diplomatic solution. Such a solution will be stronger if it is broad-based.